There is a moment I want you to imagine. You are 9 years old, walking through the woods with your father on a crisp Saturday morning. The air smells like pine and wet earth. You feel important, small legs keeping pace with long ones, convinced that today you are being treated like someone who matters. Then another boy runs past, points at a small brown bird perched on a low branch, and turns to you with the pride of someone who has studied. That, he announces, is a brown-throated thrush. In Portuguese they call it in Chinese chestnut-backed thrush, in Japanese. Your father places a quiet hand on your shoulder. He waits for the boy to finish. Then he looks at you, not at the boy, and says something you will carry for the rest of your life. He knows what that bird is called in every language on earth. But do you know something? He still knows nothing about that bird. I was that child. That was my father. And that single moment, standing in the woods with a small brown bird and a gentle correction, became the foundation of everything I would later understand about thinking, real thinking, and why almost nobody actually does it. Let me tell you what my father meant, because it took me years to fully hear it. Knowing the name of something feels like understanding. It has the same shape, the same weight in conversation. When you say that is a brown-throated thrush, people nod. They assume you know something. You assume you know something. But the name is only a ticket, it is not the destination. The bird's name tells you nothing about how it searches for food in winter. Nothing about the particular way it tilts its head before it sings. Nothing about the physics of how its hollow bones allow it to cut through cold air at 30 miles an hour without breaking apart. A label is not knowledge. It is a social agreement that we have all decided to call this thing this word, nothing more. My father was a uniform salesman. He never went to university. He never published a paper. But he understood something about knowledge that many professors I later worked beside never grasped, that curiosity must go past the name, past the definition, all the way into the living machinery of a thing. He taught me to ask not what is it called, but what is it doing and why. I carried that lesson with me to MIT, then to Princeton, then to the greatest scientific institutions in the world. And I want to be honest with you about what I found there because I think you deserve the truth. I expected wonder. I found performance. The students at these universities were, by every conventional measure, extraordinary. They could recite Maxwell's equations from memory without pausing to breathe. They could reproduce entire textbook proofs on a chalkboard with the fluid confidence of pianists playing scales. They were fast, precise, and impressively fluent in the vocabulary of physics, mathematics, and science. So I began asking them questions. Not trick questions, genuine ones. The kind a curious person asks when they want to understand something rather than simply confirm that they already do. You've written down the equation for electromagnetic induction. Beautiful. Now tell me, what would you actually see? If you were standing inside that field, what would the world look like around you? Silence, shifting eyes. The confident hands that had just danced across the chalkboard now very still at their sides. They had memorized the map perfectly. They had never once imagined standing in the territory. This was not stupidity. I want to be precise about that. These were genuinely gifted people. But somewhere between childhood and graduate school, a quiet substitution had been made, and most of them never noticed. The original goal, which was understanding, had been gently replaced by a more manageable and more rewarded substitute, performance of understanding. And the tragedy is that the two things can look identical from the outside, in a lecture hall, on an examination paper, at a conference. You cannot tell the difference until the moment you ask a real question. And here is why this matters beyond the walls of a university. We live inside systems that reward the performance. Schools give the highest marks to students who can reproduce information most accurately. Corporations promote the people who speak most fluently about strategy, disruption, and innovation. Dinner tables fall quiet for the guest who can deliver the most confident answer. We have built an entire civilization that incentivizes the appearance of knowing, and that does something quiet and corrosive to the human mind over time. It teaches us to stop at the name, to collect labels instead of understanding, to confuse fluency with depth. Most people are not lazy. They are simply never shown the difference. Nobody pulls them aside, the way my father pulled me aside in the woods and points out that the name of the bird is not the bird. So I will do it now. I will be your father in the woods just for a moment. Think of something you believe you understand well. A concept from your work, a principle you would confidently explain to someone else, a belief you hold about how the world operates. Hold it in your mind. Now explain it to me without using its name, without using any technical vocabulary, without borrowed phrases you read somewhere and kept. Explain it as if you are describing the inside of it, the way it moves, the reason it works, the thing it does when no one is nomming it. Can you? If the answer comes easily, comfortably in plain images and honest words, then you understand it. You own it. It is yours. But if you reach for the familiar term and find that without it there is nothing behind your hand, if the label was the whole thing, then you have not yet met what you think you know. You have only learned its name. And that is exactly where real thinking begins. I want to tell you about the worst year of my life. It was 1945. The war had just ended. I was 27 years old, sitting in a faculty office at university with the title of professor and the feeling of a man who had already used up everything he had. My wife had died of tuberculosis while I was working on the Manhattan Project, working on a bomb, while the person I loved most was disappearing in a hospital bed 2 hours away. I had poured what remained of myself into the war effort. And when it was over, I sat down at my desk, looked at a blank sheet of paper, and felt absolutely nothing. Physics, the thing that had lit me up since childhood, had gone dark. I couldn't think. I couldn't care. Every time I tried to work, the voice in my head said the same thing. You've already done your best work. Whatever comes next will be smaller. I believed that voice for almost 2 years. Then one afternoon in the cafeteria, everything changed because of a plate. A student across the room tossed a dinner plate into the air. One of those idle, thoughtless gestures people make when they are bored and waiting for food. The plate spun upward, wobbled, and came back down. That was all. A plate. A wobble. 2 seconds of nothing. But I noticed something. The plate was wobbling at one rate and spinning at another, and the two rates were not the same. The wobble was faster, and I had absolutely no reason to care about this. There was no grant attached to it, no paper due, no professor waiting for my answer. It was a meaningless observation in a university cafeteria on an ordinary afternoon. But I wanted to know why. Not because it mattered, not because it would lead anywhere, purely because the question had shown up inside me, the way a song gets stuck in your head, and I was, for the first time in 2 years, genuinely curious about something. I started calculating. I worked out the mathematics of the wobble, the relationship between the two rates of spin, the elegant ratio hiding inside what looked like random motion. I showed my work to Hans, one of the finest physicists alive. He looked at it and said, with supreme reasonableness, "That's very interesting, but what is the importance of it?" I told him it had no importance whatsoever. I was just playing. He was not impressed. I didn't mind. Because that playful afternoon in the cafeteria, that completely purposeless calculation born from nothing more than idle curiosity, eventually threaded its way into my work on the behavior of electrons, which threaded its way into quantum electrodynamics, which, in 1965, became the reason I stood in Stockholm and accepted the Nobel Prize in physics. I got the Nobel Prize for playing with a plate. I tell you this not to be dramatic, but because it is the most honest illustration I know of how real thinking actually works, and why the 3 laws I am about to share with you are not philosophical advice. They are a description of what genuinely happens inside the mind when understanding catches fire. The first law: visualize, do not memorize. Every equation I ever worked with, I first built as a picture. Before I wrote a single symbol, I closed my eyes and constructed a scene. I watched the electrons move. I felt the pull of the field. I saw the waves arriving, overlapping, canceling each other out, or doubling in height. I treated every concept in physics like a film playing privately in my mind, one I could pause, rewind, zoom into, walk around the edges of. The mathematics came second always. It was the language I used to describe the movie, but the movie had to come first. This is not how most people are taught to learn. They are handed a formula and asked to manipulate it, to carry terms across an equals sign, to substitute variables, to arrive at a correct answer. And they can do this, often brilliantly, without ever once asking what the formula is showing them, without ever standing inside it, without ever building the scene it was written to describe. The result is that the formula lives only on paper. The moment you change the conditions, remove the textbook scaffolding, and ask a genuine question about the real world, there is nothing to hold on to. The words are there. The understanding is not. So here is what I ask of you. The next time you encounter something you are trying to learn, a process, a principle, an idea, do not begin by memorizing it. Begin by picturing it. Make it move. Give it weight and color and behavior. Ask yourself what it would look like if you could see it happening in front of you. Build the scene first. Then let the language follow. If you can picture it clearly, you own it. If you cannot picture it, you have only borrowed it, and borrowed things have a way of disappearing exactly when you need them most. The second law: ask why like a child. Children are the most rigorous thinkers on earth, and we spend approximately 10 years of formal education curing them of it. A child asks why without shame, without strategy, and without any awareness that there is a socially acceptable depth beyond which the question becomes impolite. They ask why the sky is blue. They accept the answer about light scattering and immediately ask why light scatters. They accept that answer and ask why shorter wavelengths scatter more. They keep going, cheerfully, ruthlessly, until the adult in front of them either reaches the true bottom of their understanding or, more commonly, says, "Because that's just how it works," which is the universal signal that the adult has reached the edge of what they actually know and would prefer not to go further. That is the edge I want you to find. Not to embarrass anyone, but because that edge, the place where the comfortable explanation runs out, is precisely where real understanding begins. I practiced this my entire career. When a concept felt solid in my hands, I would pull at it. I would ask why the rule held, then why the reason for the rule was true, then what would happen if I removed one assumption, then why removing that assumption changed the outcome. I drilled downward, past the layer of accepted knowledge, past the textbook justification, all the way to the bedrock, the place where the answer was not because someone said so, but because the universe actually behaved that way and you could see it, test it, feel the truth of it. Most people stop 3 layers up from the bedrock, not because they lack the intelligence to go further, but because they were never shown that going further was allowed. that the question does not become rude or strange or impractical the deeper you take it. It becomes more valuable. Reclaim the child's instinct. Ask one more why then feels comfortable. Then ask another. The foundation is down there, solid and waiting. You just have to be willing to keep digging until you reach it. The third law, have the courage to say, I don't know. This is the shortest law. It is also the hardest. Pretending to understand is the single most effective way to guarantee that you never will. The moment you perform comprehension you do not have, you close the door on the question. The conversation moves on. The gap stays hidden. And slowly, over time, the gaps accumulate, each one papered over with a confident nod, a borrowed phrase, a well-timed silence, until the foundation of what you think you know is riddled with hollow spaces you have never examined. I made a policy early in my career of saying, I don't know out loud in rooms where it costs something to say it, in front of colleagues, in front of students, in front of people I wanted to impress, not as a performance of humility, but because it was true, and because the truth, spoken plainly, is the only door that opens into real learning. Every time I said it, something happened. The question became alive again. The person across from me stopped nodding and started thinking. The conversation dropped from the polished surface down into the actual problem, and I moved one step closer to understanding something genuinely, rather than appearing to understand it socially. Uncertainty is not weakness. It is a compass. It points directly at the place where your thinking needs to go next. The people who never say, I don't know, are not more knowledgeable. They are more lost. They have simply stopped being able to see the territory because they have convinced themselves and everyone around them that the map is enough. The map is never enough. Admit where it runs out. That is where the real journey starts. I want to return, before I close, to the plate. I have thought many times about why that spinning plate unlocked something in me that 2 years of trying to force my way back to brilliance had not. And the answer, I believe, is simple. I was not trying to be brilliant. I was not performing understanding or filling a gap or building toward anything. I was just playing, following a question that had arrived in me uninvited, for no reason except that it was interesting, and I was alive and curious, and the afternoon was long. Curiosity without agenda is the form of thinking there is. It asks nothing of itself except to go deeper. It has no deadline, no grade, no reputation staked on the outcome. It is the mind in its most natural and most powerful state, the state you were in as a child in the woods, before anyone taught you that some questions are more important than others. The 3 laws I have described, visualize, question relentlessly, admit what you don't know, are the discipline. But this last thing, the playfulness, the willingness to follow a wobbling plate just because it interests you, is the ignition. Without it, the discipline is only machinery. With it, the machinery comes alive. You were born knowing how to think this way. The boy in the woods who knew the bird's name in 5 languages was not unintelligent. He had simply been shown, over and over, that accumulating labels was the same as accumulating knowledge, and he believed it, the way children believe what the adults around them demonstrate. Most of us received the same lesson. Most of us are still living inside it. But the alternative is available to you. It does not require a particular kind of brain, or a childhood spent in the right library, or a gift you either have or don't. It requires only that you look at the next thing you encounter, a concept, a process, a belief, a spinning plate, and decide deliberately to go past its name. Picture it, question it, admit what you don't yet see, and follow it wherever it goes with the playful, stubborn, joyful seriousness of someone who actually wants to understand the world rather than simply describe it. The world calls that playing. I call it thinking. And I promise you, Anyone in this room can do it. Richard,